The broken transmission Lieutenant Marcus Kane pressed his back against the twisted metal of the crashed transport. His breathing shallow as plasma fire scorched the air above his head. The acrid smell of burning electronics mixed with the metallic taste of blood in his mouth. His communication device crackled with static, punctuated by the desperate voices of his scattered unit. "Kane, report your position." Captain Elena Vasquez's voice cut through the interference, strained and urgent. Pinned down near the wreckage, about 2 clicks from the landing zone, Marcus whispered into his comm, watching the alien soldiers advance through the smoke-filled canyon. Their elongated forms moved with predatory grace, their weapons charging with an ominous blue glow. The war had been raging for 3 years now, ever since first contact had gone catastrophically wrong. Azirathi, as they called themselves, had initially seemed interested in peaceful dialogue until a misunderstanding during the first diplomatic summit had triggered this bloody conflict. Now, both sides fought with the desperate fury of species convinced the other meant their extinction. Marcus's scanner picked up an unusual signal, not the typical military frequencies, but something else entirely. The transmission was faint, almost musical in its cadence, and it seemed to be coming from deeper in the canyon system. Against his better judgment, he found himself drawn to it. "Elena, I'm picking up something strange on the long-range scanner," he reported, adjusting his equipment to get a clearer reading. "Negative, Kane. Fall back to rally point 7. "That's an order." But before Marcus could respond, the world exploded around him. Azirathi Plasma Ken had found their position, and the resulting blast sent him tumbling down a rocky slope. When the ringing in his ears finally subsided, he found himself alone in a narrow ravine, his comm unit sparking and useless. The mysterious transmission was stronger now, almost hypnotic in its rhythm. It seemed to pulse with his heartbeat, drawing him forward through the winding passages. His military training screamed at him to return to his unit, but something deeper instinct, perhaps, or desperation urged him to follow the signal not as. He ventured deeper into the alien landscape. The canyon walls began to change. The harsh, angular rock formations gave way to something more organic, almost flowing. Bioluminescent patches dotted the walls, casting everything in an eerie blue-green glow. The air grew warmer, humid, carrying scents he couldn't identify. Hours passed as Marcus followed the signal, his water running low and his ammunition nearly depleted. The transmission had grown so strong that he could almost hear it without his equipment, a haunting melody that seemed to speak directly to his mind. When he finally reached the source, he found himself standing before a massive cavern entrance, its walls covered in what looked like living crystal formations. The signal was emanating from within, and despite every instinct telling him to turn back, Marcus stepped into the glowing depths. The cavern stretched before him like a cathedral, its ceiling lost in darkness, while the walls pulsed with gentle light. At the center of the vast space stood a figure tall, graceful, unmistakably alien, yet somehow familiar. She turned as he approached, and Marcus found himself looking into eyes that held the wisdom of ages and the weight of countless sorrows. The transmission had stopped, replaced by a silence so profound it seemed to echo in his moans. "You received my call," she said, her voice carrying the same musical quality as the transmission. "I am Zarinef, scout of the 4th Spiral. And you, human warrior, are exactly who I have been waiting for." The crimson forest encounter Marcus's hand moved instinctively to his weapon, but something in Zarineth's posture made him pause. She stood with her arms at her sides, her posture suggesting wariness rather than aggression. In the crystal light, he could see that she was wounded dark fluid seeping from a gash along her shoulder. "You're hurt," he said, surprising himself, with the concern in his voice. "As are you," she replied, nodding toward the blood staining his uniform. "A battle 3 hours ago was unfortunate. My patrol was also separated. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure. They wanted to cross. Marcus had seen plenty of Zirathi warriors in combat, but never this close, never in a moment of vulnerability. Zaraneth's features were more delicate than he'd expected, sharp cheekbones and large eyes that seemed to hold depths of starlight. "Why? Did you call me here?" Marcus asked, lowering his weapon, but keeping it ready. Before she could answer, a sound echoed through the cavern, a deep, resonant growl that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Zaraneth's expression changed instantly, her eyes widening with recognition and fear. "The Devourers," she whispered. "They hunt by scent, drawn to blood. We must move now." The cavern began to shake, and Marcus could hear the scraping of massive claws against stone. Without thinking, he reached for Zaraneth's uninjured arm. "This way. There's a passage to the surface." They ran through the twisting tunnels, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind them. The creatures, whatever they were, moved with terrifying speed, their calls echoing off the walls like the screams of the dying. Marcus's lungs burned as they climbed toward the surface, Zaraneth keeping pace despite her injury. They emerged into a forest unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. The trees were crimson and gold, their leaves shimmering with their own inner light. The air was thick with spores that glowed like fireflies, creating a dreamlike atmosphere that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. "The crimson reaches," Zaraneth explained breathlessly. "Sacred to my people, but dangerous. The trees themselves are carnivorous." As if summoned by her words, the nearest tree began to move, its branches reaching toward them with deliberate intent. Marcus grabbed Zaraneth's hand and pulled her deeper into the forest, weaving between the grasping limbs. "There," she pointed to a clearing ahead. "The trees cannot grow in the mineral pools." They reached the safety of the clearing just as the first devourer burst from the tunnel behind them. The creature was massive, all teeth and claws and hunger, its hide scarred from countless battles. It roared in frustration as the carnivorous trees turned their attention to it. Branches wrapping around its limbs, Marcus and Zaraneth collapsed beside one of the glowing pools, both breathing hard. The water was warm and tinged with minerals. That seemed to ease the pain of their wounds. For a moment, they simply sat in silence, processing what had just happened. "You saved my life," Zaraneth said finally, her voice soft with wonder. "You saved mine first," Marcus replied. "That transmission, it led me away from the battle just before the orbital bombardment hit." She looked at him with those deep eyes, and Marcus felt something shift inside him. This was supposed to be his enemy, but sitting here in glow of the mineral pools, she seemed more like a fellow survivor. "The transmission was not meant for you specifically," she admitted. "It was a distress call, sent on old frequencies from before the war. I did not expect a human to receive it. But you're glad I did." It wasn't a question, and she didn't answer with words. Instead, she moved closer, her hand finding his. The touch was electric, sending warmth through his entire body. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of creatures, the splash of something large moving through the pools. "The war has taken so much from both our peoples," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes I wonder if we remember what we are fighting for." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not an alien enemy, but a person, someone who had lost friends, who carried scars both visible and hidden, who wanted nothing more than to find peace in a galaxy gone mad with violence. "Maybe," he said, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her hand. "It's time we remembered what we're fighting against." The underground sanctuary, the forest around them had grown quiet, the predatory trees settling into dormancy as the twin moons rose overhead. Marcus and Zaraneth had spent hours by the mineral pools, tending to their wounds and sharing stories of their respective worlds. The conversation had been hesitant at first, filled with the caution of enemies learning to trust, but gradually it had become something more. My grandmother once told me that the universe has a way of bringing the right people together at the right moment, Zaraneth said, her voice carrying the weight of memory. I never believed her until now. Marcus felt a stirring in his chest, something he hadn't experienced since before the war began. What happens when the moment ends? Before she could answer, the ground beneath them began to shift. The mineral pools started to drain, revealing intricate patterns carved into the stone below. Ancient symbols glowed with soft light, forming a complex mandala that seemed to pulse with life. The sacred geometry, Zaraneth breathed, her eyes wide with recognition. I have only heard stories. The clearing transformed around them, the stone floor descending to reveal a hidden chamber below. Crystalline formations lined the walls, each one humming with a different tone, creating a harmony that resonated in their bones. At the center of the chamber stood a figure that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. Queen Thyravel was not what he had expected. Where the propaganda had painted the Zirathi ruler as a monster, he saw instead a being of ethereal beauty and profound sadness. Her skin held the pale luminescence of starlight, and her eyes were pools of liquid silver that seemed to hold the weight of worlds. Zaraneth, the queen's voice carried across the chamber like music. You have done well to bring him here. Your Majesty, Zaraneth bowed deeply, but there was confusion in her voice. I did not know. The transmission was yours? The transmission was mine, but the choice to follow it was his, Thyravel replied, her gaze settling on Marcus. Just as the choice to trust was yours. Such decisions cannot be commanded, only hoped for. Marcus found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. You're the Zirathi queen. I should be your prisoner. And I should be your enemy, she replied, moving closer with fluid grace. Yet here we stand, not as captor and captive, but as three souls who have found their way to the heart of an ancient mystery. The chamber around them seemed to respond to her words, the crystals brightening and their harmonies growing more complex. Marcus could feel something awakening in the very stones beneath his feet, something that had been sleeping for millennia. This place is old, Thyravel continued, her hand trailing along one of the crystal formations. Older than our war, older than our first contact, older than either of our civilizations. It was built by those who came before, as a sanctuary, for times when the universe itself seemed bent on destruction. What do you want from me? Marcus asked, though he found himself drawn to her presence despite his caution. The same thing you want, she said, her silver eyes meeting his. An end to the dying. A chance for both our peoples to find peace. Zaraneth stepped forward, her expression troubled. The Council of Elders would never accept a human envoy, and the human military would consider any collaboration to be treason, which is why it cannot be done through conventional means, Thyravel replied. The ancients who built this place understood that sometimes peace requires sacrifice. They left us away, but it demands trust beyond reason and courage beyond measure. She gestured to the walls around them, where Marcus could now see that the crystal formations were not random, but formed intricate patterns, star maps, perhaps, or something more complex, the bonding ritual of the first builders. It creates a link between representatives of two species, allowing them to share not just thoughts and feelings, but the very essence of their being. Through this connection, they can become bridges between their peoples. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs. What kind of bonding? The kind that changes you forever, Thyravel said softly. The kind that makes it impossible to see the other as enemy ever again. The kind that, once completed, makes the bonded individuals living proof that peace is possible. The chamber fell silent, except for the gentle harmony of the crystals. Marcus looked at Zaraneth, saw the hope and fear warring in her expression, then turned back to the queen. "If I agree to this," he said carefully, "what happens to my unit? My people? They will be safe," Thyravel promised. "The ritual requires a willing sacrifice from both sides. I offer myself as the Zirathi representative." The words hung in the air like a challenge and a plea. Marcus realized that this moment, this choice, would define not just his own fate, but potentially the fate of two entire civilizations. The night of understanding, the ritual chamber had transformed as the night deepened, the crystals now pulsing in rhythm with Marcus's heartbeat. Queen Thyravel had dismissed Zaraneth to stand guard at the chamber's entrance, leaving the two of them alone with the weight of their decision. "Are you afraid?" Thyravel asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she approached him. Marcus considered the question seriously. "Terrified," he admitted, "but not of you, of what this means, of what we're about to become." She smiled then, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, and it transformed her entire face. "In my language, there is a word Threnvel, which means the fear that comes before great change. It is considered a blessing, a sign that the spirits are preparing you for transformation." The queen moved to the center of the chamber, where an intricate circle of symbols had been carved into the floor. The markings seemed to shift and flow in the crystal light, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. The ancients believed that understanding between species could only come through the sharing of souls. She explained, her hands gracefully tracing the symbols. Not just minds touching, but the very essence of what makes us who we are. Marcus stepped into the circle, feeling the stone warm beneath his feet. "How does it work?" "Through connection," Thyravel said, moving to stand before him. "Through trust. Through the willingness to be vulnerable with someone who should be your enemy." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Her skin was soft and warm, more human than he had expected, and he found himself leaning into the touch. "I have watched your people through intelligence reports," she said softly. "You are warriors, but you are also poets. You create beauty in the midst of destruction. You love fiercely and protect those you cannot save. In many ways, you are not so different from us." "And your people?" Marcus asked, his hand coming up to cover hers. "We are explorers of the deep void, dreamers of star zones, keepers of ancient wisdom. We have survived by adapting, by finding harmony in chaos. But we have also learned to fight when cornered, to strike first when threatened." The crystals around them began to resonate more intensely, and Marcus could feel something stirring. In the air between them, an energy that seemed to recognize their growing connection. "The ritual," Thyravel said, her voice taking on a formal cadence, "requires the sharing of three things: memory, emotion, and essence. Are you prepared to open your mind to mine?" Marcus nodded, though his heart was racing. "What do I need to do?" "Simply be present," she replied, her other hand finding his. "Be honest. Be yourself." The moment their hands joined, the world exploded into sensation. Marcus felt his consciousness expanding, touching something vast and alien yet strangely familiar. He was suddenly aware of Thyravel's thoughts, her memories, her deepest fears and hopes. He saw her childhood on a world of silver spires and singing winds, felt her grief when the first human ships had been destroyed in the initial misunderstanding, experienced her desperate attempts to find a peaceful solution as the war escalated beyond control. In return, he felt her witnessing his own memories growing up on Earth, joining the military to protect his younger sister, the first time he'd killed in combat, and the nightmares that followed. She experienced his love for his home world, his fear of dying alone and forgotten, his secret hope that someday the fighting would end. As their minds intertwined, their bodies drew closer. The connection was intimate beyond anything Marcus had ever experienced, more than physical, more than emotional. He could feel Thayravel's essence mingling with his own, changing him in ways he couldn't yet understand. "I can feel your pain," she whispered, her forehead touching his. "The weight of all the lives you've taken, all the friends you've lost." "And I can feel yours," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "The responsibility, the loneliness, the impossible choices." They stood together in the circle of light, no longer human and alien, but simply two souls recognizing themselves in each other. The crystals around them sang with increasing intensity, and Marcus felt something fundamental shifting in the fabric of reality itself. "Whatever happens now," Thayravel said, her lips brushing against his, "we are no longer alone." The kiss that followed was electric, charged with the power of the ritual and the desperate hope of two peoples on the brink of extinction. In that moment, Marcus felt the last of his preconceptions about the Zirathi crumble away, replaced by something far more complex and beautiful. The dawn of choice, the first light of dawn, filtered through the crystal chamber, casting rainbow patterns across the walls. Marcus awoke to find himself changed in ways that went beyond the physical, though he could feel that too, a new awareness of the world around him, an enhanced sensitivity to the life force that flowed through all things. Thayravel lay beside him, her silver eyes already open, watching the light dance across the ceiling. The bonding ritual had been completed sometime during the night, and Marcus could feel the permanent connection between them, a golden thread that linked their souls across the vast differences in their biology. "How do you feel?" she asked, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in his bones. "Different," Marcus replied honestly. "Like I've been seeing the world through a dirty window my whole life, and someone finally cleaned it." She smiled, and he felt her amusement through there. The ancients called it the awakening. You now carry within you the essence of my people, as I carry yours. We are bridges between worlds." A commotion outside the chamber interrupted their quiet moment. Zaraneth's voice echoed through the passages, urgent and worried. "Your Majesty, human forces approaching a full battalion." Marcus felt his heart sink even as he reached for his scattered equipment. Through the bond, he could sense Thayravel's disappointment, tinged with resignation. "My people have found me," he said, though the words felt strange in his mouth. Were they still his people? After last night, after the connection he now shared with the Zirathi Queen, where did his loyalties truly lie? "General Harrison leads them," Zaraneth reported as she appeared at the chamber entrance. "They have brought heavy weapons. I do not think they come to negotiate." Marcus knew Harrison, well, a decorated veteran who had lost his entire family in the first wave of attacks. The man would never trust a Zirathi, would see Marcus's presence here as either capture or collaboration. "You must go," Thayravel said, though Marcus could feel her reluctance through their bond. "Your people need to see that you are unharmed, that there is another way. And if they don't believe me, if they think I've been compromised, then you will have to make them understand," she replied, her hand finding his. "The bond we share, it's not just between us. It connects our peoples through us. If we can convince even one person on each side to trust, to hope, then the connection will spread." The sound of approaching aircraft grew louder, and Marcus could hear the distinctive line of military-grade weapons powering up. General Harrison wasn't taking any chances. "There is a back passage," Zaraneth said urgently. "It leads to the surface near the old mining complex. You could escape." "No," Marcus interrupted, his decision crystallizing. "Running won't solve anything. It's time to face this." He turned to Thayravel, memorizing her face in the crystal light. Through their bond, he could feel her love, her fear, her desperate hope for peace. Whatever happens, remember that this was real, that we chose to trust each other. I will remember, she promised, and sealed it with a kiss that tasted of starlight and possibility. Marcus made his way to the surface, emerging from the cavern system just as the first transport ships landed. Soldiers poured out, weapons raised, and he found himself staring down the barrels of a dozen plasma rifles. "Stand down," General Harrison's voice boomed across the clearing. "Lieutenant Kane, step away from the alien structure." Marcus raised his hands, but didn't move. "General, I need to speak with you. There's been a development. You've been missing." For 18 hours, Kane, we detected massive energy signatures from this location. What happened here? Through the bond, Marcus could feel Thyrivall's presence, her strength supporting him. He took a deep breath and made his choice. "I made contact with their queen," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "She wants to negotiate a ceasefire." The reaction was immediate and predictable. Shouts of disbelief, accusations of brainwashing, weapons being raised higher. But Marcus stood his ground, feeling the power of the bond flowing through him. "Sir, I know how this sounds, but I'm still me. I'm still loyal to Earth and to humanity. But I've seen another way, a way that doesn't end with one of our species extinct." General Harrison studied him for a long moment, his weathered face creased. "With suspicion and something that might have been hope. You're asking me to trust aliens, Kane, after everything they've done to us." "I'm asking you to trust me," Marcus replied, "to give peace a chance." Behind him, he could sense Thyrivall. Emerging from the cavern, Zaraneth at her side. The soldiers' weapons swung toward them, but Marcus stepped between them, his arms spread wide. "This is Queen Thyrivall of the Zirathi," he announced. "She comes under a flag of truce, seeking an end to the war that has cost both our peoples. Too much. The next few moments would determine the fate of two civilizations." Marcus felt the weight of it in his bones, in the bond that connected him to Thyrivall, in the desperate hope of every being on both sides who had lost someone to this senseless conflict. "General," he said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, "the choice is yours. But remember, peace is not the absence of war. It's the presence of hope." The sun rose higher, painting the alien landscape in shades of gold and possibility as two species stood on the brink of either destruction or a new beginning.